Hello, folks. Um, I've decided to go ahead and read the second half of Unauthorized Spread by Cory Doctorow. I did the first 50 pages a day or so ago, and I just wanted to, before I open, last night I did a live stream, and I was touching on Raul Diego's recent piece for Silicon Icarus about the Nigerian Civil War and it being set up to sort of usher in, a while later, the development aid that created the impact space. And I also wanted to mention tonight my colleague Steffers. She blogs at A Piece of Mindful and is really a talented researcher and really great at pulling lots of pieces together. Her sort of expertise is looking at sort of encoded information and messaging and sort of linking things together. So I would encourage you, if you have a chance, to go to her blog. Well, it's a collective blog, but she blogs at Steffers at A Piece, Piece of Mindful. And it's actually about magenta. So I don't know if you remember, a bit ago, I did a blog post about the Jubilee, the Queen's Jubilee, and lighting the beacon, and the fact that the pedestal that the sort of crown with the Commonwealth globe was on was sort of this T-Mobile pink magenta. And so she sort of just ran with that over the past month or so and has compiled all sorts of information about imprinting with the color magenta. So again, I encourage you to check it out. Those of us who are sort of the small-time bloggers, we don't often get all the eyeballs, and it's a lot of work. So I definitely want to uplift the people whose work I really appreciate. So yesterday, Raul Diego at Silicon Icarus, and today Steffers at A Piece of Mindful. Nigerian Civil War and magenta, take your pick, but you should maybe check out both of them. So I'm just getting back to this book. This book, Radicalized. It has 4 different novellas in it. I read it quite a while ago, like well before the lockdowns. And the first chapter is the story of a young woman who is a refugee and what her life is like as a refugee, and then eventually getting sort of winning the jackpot and getting an affordable housing unit in Boston, but it's not exactly as it appears. And there's a lot of, it's very confined, and it has all of these Internet of Things appliances in them that are very highly regulatory. The unauthorized bread means that you can only toast authorized bread in the toaster, and it has like an eye, so you can only toast approved bread. And then one day, eventually, the company, both the toaster company and the dishwasher company that only accepts certain kinds of dishes, they go bankrupt. And so eventually the firmware that's on those Internet of Things appliances won't work anymore, and simply they just don't work. And she goes on the dark web and sort of finds a way of getting around the security measures on these Internet of Things devices. And then eventually it sort of spreads throughout the poor units in this mixed development, especially among the kids who are really good with the technology, and they start hacking all of the appliances. So that's sort of the first half of this. And then I'm going to start the second half, which essentially the son, who's the son of her good friend and neighbor, like 7 floors up, he's been teaching the other kids how to hack the appliances, only they run into technical difficulty, and the landlords are really, really harsh. And so she's afraid that the kids will sort of overreach and draw attention to what they're doing. And so she's asked them to all meet at her tiny little apartment. And that's where it starts. Okay, so the woman's name is Salima. She bought snacks for the kids, more than she thought she'd need, but it wasn't enough. They just kept coming, scratching at her door until she just propped it open. And still they came, cramming into her flat. 10 kids, 20, 40. And then she lost count. And they stood in the bathroom, and they passed around bags of sweets and pretzels, and they filled her kitchen and stood on the counter, and one of them sat in her kitchen sink. Quiet, please, quiet. And they shushed each other. And she turned to Adibrahim, that's the little boy. Is this everyone? He made a show of craning his neck around the room and nodded. I think so. She shook her head at him. Close the door, please, and someone please turn up the air conditioning. The smell was that goaty, musky smell of many children at various stages of puberty in an enclosed space, a smell that brought her back to the kids' dorms in the camps she'd lived in. I want to start by saying I'm very proud of you all. You've taught yourselves some important skills, and you've helped your neighbors when they needed it. But you know that what you've done, and what I did too, is against the rules. And now that it's happening so often, it's going to be harder and harder not to get caught. Getting caught is not an option. Can anyone tell me why? A forest of arms shot up, and the smell buffeted her again. And she pointed to a young girl, chubby, with a face full of clever mischief. Because we'll get thrown out of the building. Salima nodded. What else? The girl thought for a moment. Also, everyone we've helped will get thrown out. Salima nodded again. Very good. It was good to hear that the kids knew the stakes. And it was also scary to hear them uttered out loud, and scarier still to think of the level of recklessness the kids had exhibited, even though they'd understood those stakes. I've been researching this because I don't know any more about this than any of you. I learned by watching the same videos and reading the same message boards as you. But we're not the only ones going through this, and there's been a lot of talk about it. The companies that made Disher and Boulangism, Disher is the washing machine and Boulangism is the toaster, have been bought up by new owners who say they'll be back online soon. And so we need to figure out how to stay safe once that happens. She checked to see whether they were following all of this. It was pretty esoteric, this idea of bankruptcies by distant companies. What did these kids think about the appliances they jailbroke? Did they see them as just weirdly non-functional gadgets they had to work around, like the bad touch screens at the shelter? Or did they see them as the enemy, something that they were at war with, the weapons of a distant adversary who wanted to subjugate them to its will? Now, I think that's right. I'm going to read that again. Okay. She checked to see whether they were following all of this. It was pretty esoteric, this idea of bankruptcies by distant companies. What did these kids think about the appliances they jailbroke? Did they see them as just weirdly non-functional gadgets they had to work around, like the bad touch screens at the shelter? Or did they see them as the enemy, something they were at war with, the weapons of a distant adversary who wanted to subjugate them to its will? I think that's really, really important. The truth is that no one seems to know exactly how the companies will monitor what we do, especially after they have new owners. A lot of the original programmers were fired, and some of them are on those same message boards, or at least they claim to be the original programmers. And there's a real race on to see who can come up with a reliable way to track the monitors into thinking that we haven't been jailbreaking. We're definitely going to have to change people's appliances so that they generate some billings for the company, because they notice if no money was coming from Dorchester Towers, right? There was nodding, and they were following along. They were bright kids, she thought. Kids who had spent their whole lives outsmarting gadgets that were designed to control them. So here's the assignment. We're going to read all the message boards and bring back what we find and figure out which people seem to know what they're talking about. And then we are going to go back to every apartment and tweak all of those appliances so that they are safe. Well, that's assuming we come up with a decent plan. If we decide that no one knows what they're talking about, we're going to restore every appliance to its factory defaults, unjailbreak everything. And that prompted groans and even a few cries of protest, but she held her hands up. I know, but better to have bad appliances than no home. There are millions of people around the world in the same situation as us anyway, and they're all trying to solve this problem. So perhaps it won't be so hard as all of that. I know that reading message boards isn't as much fun as messing around with gadgets, but if you want to be able to keep jailbreaking, you'll have to do the research too. It was too crowded for much Q&A, but Adibrahim put his hand up anyway, and she called on him. Auntie, there's one thing I can't figure out. Only one? She smiled, and he smiled back. For now. Now, when I bring a notepad to school, I can write anything I want on it. I don't need to ask the company that made the pen or the store that sold me the notebook how I can use it. I can tear out the pages and make paper airplanes or doodle or copy down what the teacher says. And when I put on a pair of shoes, I can wear any socks I want. I can walk anywhere I want to go on my shoes. And I can wipe myself with any sort of toilet paper. That got a laugh. But I can't toast any bread I want in my toaster? She waited. He was struggling to find the words. What's the question, Adibrahim? He shook his head and shrugged. Well, I guess I don't know. I just want to understand how it can be against the law to choose your bread but not your socks. I mean, what makes a toaster different from shoes? She opened her mouth to answer, but discovered she didn't know the answer. I mean, right up until that moment, she'd felt like she had some intuitive sense of which things were objects with rules and which things were objects without rules. Felt it so readily that she hadn't even named the two categories until just that instant. And now she tried to come up with a rule to explain the difference between the two. And she found she couldn't. So, and I think this is really an important piece here. And I didn't remember this part, but the things with rules and the things without rules, that's the smart contract layer. That's the Web 3.0 surveillance layer, is the things with rules and the things without rules. And how are we actually going to know how many things are going to have rules and how they'll come up with rules for things that didn't used to have rules, right? Like, will they have rules for shoes? Like, we know that they can put sensors in shoes. So will there be rules for shoes just like toasters? It's hard because I was just talking to my husband, like we've had some disagreements over all of this and just navigating it, right? Because most people don't want to know. Most people don't want to have the time, put in the time. And I'm like, this mixed reality is not far off. Like, it's something that before it happens, we should have, a robust debate about it and what it means in terms of having the built environment made out of things with rules and things with no rules, and who makes the rules and the rule verifications. And that's tied to digital identity and the sensor networks. And I don't know, like, I would be interested if any of you are following along, want to comment, like, how do we educate people about this? Because I keep being told that nobody cares, that we don't actually want to know, and that we really just want to check out and talk about stuff that doesn't matter. And like, where's the space to talk about the stuff that does matter? I mean, we pretend we're this civil society, that cares about, I guess governance or all of these things, but we're not going to care about things with rules and things without rules, even though that they're already telling us on the media, the nosedive Black Mirror episodes, that this is coming. I don't know. I feel really broken up about it because, to have this on your soul and then be told, well, you can't talk about it. Nobody cares. Most people don't care. No, people don't want to know. And if you want to talk about it, you're just sort of an outcast. You're a party pooper. I don't know. If you guys have any thoughts, please chime in, because it's a bunch. So, things with rules, things without rules. That is an excellent question, she said at last. Why don't you research the answer and tell us all what you find out? And he rolled his eyes and he let out a showy groan, but he looked excited by the challenge. He was a really bright little fellow. He chased the kids out of the flat, buzzing with conversation, joking and shoving and posturing the way of kids. And the smell lingered after they were gone, and she turned up the HVAC to 140% of its normal capacity, a feature whose purpose had mystified her when she jailbroken the thermostat. But now she was thankful for it. She tried to go to sleep, but Adibrahim's question nagged at her, and so she raised her bed until it was a sofa. This is a tiny apartment. Everything is everything else. All those ads you see about convertible furniture. It's this. She raised her bed until it was a sofa and worked on the big screen for a couple of hours, discovering to her relief that reading about technology law was better than a sleeping pill. There was something about the woman standing over her on the tee that snagged her attention. She wasn't anyone Salima knew, but something about her seemed so familiar. She kept sneaking glances, and then it hit her. The logo on the woman's ID badge, dangling from a lanyard at eye height. Salima knew that logo, though she hadn't seen it in months. It was the Boulangism logo. A stylized slice of bread in a continuous line, 3 squiggly heat lines radiating off of it. The woman caught her staring, and they made eye contact. She was young and white and had messy brown hair and those contacts the computer people wore to help them stare at the screens all day without messing up their sleep schedules. The light from the ads lining the top third of the car cast a rainbow sheen over them. Boulangism, Salima said. The woman nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, that's right. They're in Boston? Well, they are now. They got bought out by a fund on Route 128, and they have recruited a bunch of us MIT kids to bash them back into shape and get them stood up again. Of course, Boston, MIT. Militarized toasters. The woman was younger than Salima had thought, an undergrad or maybe a young grad student. Salima tried to picture the kids who crammed into her apartment as a classmate of this young woman getting tempted away from their studies by a deep-pocketed company. They were smart. But were they smart enough? I mean, how smart did you have to be? She suddenly wanted to know more about this woman. Do you have a boulangism? Salima nodded. Do you? The woman snorted. God, no. I mean, that business model, authorized bread, I mean, I wouldn't put one of those in my house if you paid me. Why'd you buy one? Okay, that's what I'm talking about. That's what makes me so angry when people who start to talk about impact finance, really they want to talk about it as a Chinese social credit score. They imagine that it's just about controlling middle-class people because it's dispossessed people who are on the front line. It's poor people, it's refugees, it's people who are institutionalized. Those are the people who are on the front lines of this thing. And not to say it's not going to get to the middle class, professional class people, but that's the divide, right? Like they would say, oh, why would you buy one of those? Why would you have an internet things? Why would you spend your money? Not understanding that it's a weapon. It's a surveillance and control weapon against dispossessed people that's used to create profit centers for these companies, right? I mean, and I think early on in all of this, when I was doing some research, there was this DNA nudge band, and it was a wearable on your wrist, and you were supposed to scan your groceries, and it was supposed to give you like nutrition advice or some nonsense, right? And I think it was even a DNA, like you had a genomic screening, and it would tell you what food to buy. And people kept saying, well, I'm never going to buy one of those. I'm not going to have one of those. And I'm like, they're going to make people have them. It's not going to be a choice. It's not going to be like you're necessarily going to, I mean, granted, they're already normalizing it with all the wearables that people are buying, but like those things, they're going to be used to control people. That's the whole point. And it's going to be coercive. It's not necessarily going to be that people have opted in. So anyway, that's my event for this morning. Like, of course, the affluent people aren't going to have the Internet of Things toasters that tells them what bread they're allowed to use. It's going to be come with the package, come with the UBI package, right? That's how it's going to go. Okay, so she answered, why'd you buy one? I didn't. It came with the apartment. Okay, that's how the co-housing is going to go, the smart gulag housing, again, which is going to center on disconnected people at first. Not to say it's not coming up for everybody eventually, but I really want for people who are in a more middle professional class level, like a managerial class level, to understand that when they talk about this and they get hysterical about the credit score controlling them, to have some empathy and understand how the social control mechanism has come up through the quote unquote social safety net policy since forever, at least the late 19th century, which is a lot of the research I've been doing today. And definitely the Lyndon Baines Johnson in the US, like the Great Society. It came with a layer of surveillance built in, and now that's even getting way much more granular. Okay. So this is the young woman. Unplug it and put it in a closet. Get a real oven. This had literally never occurred to Salima. She had no idea how much a toaster oven cost. I mean, she could probably afford it, not that she had any closet space. And then there were all of those other people on the poor floors, the old ones, the ones with kids, the ones who didn't have her skills or who couldn't speak English. She couldn't buy ovens for all of them, let alone dishwashers and all of the other appliances. You don't seem to think much of them. The woman rolled her eyes. It's a good job, and the technical challenges are interesting. Okay, it's a good job. I like a good challenge. How many tech people? It's a good job and a good challenge. Hell, even the basic units do a good job as far as that goes, but the lockdown is obnoxious. Salima couldn't help herself. I think so too. They brought in a whole team to find the people who are jailbreaking their units, a snitch squad. Now that's a job I wouldn't do. A girl's got to have standards. They'd gone past Salima's stop, but she didn't care. She could always ride back the other way. The conversation was too good to end. I'm Salima. Wyoming, the girl said, and shook. Her hands were slim, clever typist hands. Though they were in a very public place, Salima felt a bubble of inattention around them, that urban thing where you pretended you couldn't see the people pressed up against you. It was something she'd gotten good at in the camps, where there were so many times when skill was necessary to keep her sanity. When do you think you'll have the servers up again? Salima said, and the guy next to her stood to debark as they pulled into the station. How many more stops would they have? Salima thought she'd stay on one stop past Wyoming, get off, and cross to the opposite platform and ride back. If she got off at the same stop, she'd seem like a creepy stalker. Wyoming, startled at the question. Oh shit, I didn't even think about it. This must have sucked for you. How long has it been? 4 months? 5? With no oven? You must be so sick of waiting for us, huh? 5 months, Salima says. It certainly has been a long time. You poor thing. I would have just jailbroken mine. There's been so much of that, honestly. It'll be months before they sort it out, and I don't blame the users either. I mean, I agree. And they both laughed. The car was mostly empty now, and there were only 2 more stops left before they reached the end of the line. Where did this girl live? With a fancy coder's salary, she could afford a beautiful place in the middle of Cambridge, not a place out here in Needham. Salima took a risk. She liked this woman. Is that hard, jailbreaking? That's not hard at all. I mean, how could it be? Look, it's just basic security, basic math. I mean, you want to run a program on your toaster that lets you override the bread check. I mean, we don't want you to run that, so you have to have something in the operating system. It checks to see whether the program you're running is the one that we've approved. And to check that, we look at the cryptographic signature. We check to see whether the program has been signed by a private key that we keep secret. Let me back up. So in crypto, so this is one of my first introductions to crypto, right? Like that's why I've always been skeptical of crypto, because it was never about gold. It was always about managing refugees. That's the way I saw it. Okay, public and private keys. Let me see. In crypto, well, this is cryptography actually, but same thing. We have this idea of private keys and public keys, and they come in pairs, and anything the private key scrambles, only the public key can unscramble, and vice versa. So if the public key unscrambles it, it must have been scrambled by the public key. If the private key can unscramble it, it must have been scrambled by the public key. Do you get it? And suddenly, so much of what she'd read on the message boards made sense. Public keys and private keys coming in pairs. What one does, the other undoes. Like I can code a message with your public key and my private key, and only you can read it. And you know only I have written it. And it came out slowly, but she understood. But understanding was flooding through her. It was so elegant. That's exactly right. Well, a Booleangism ships with the company's public key, and all the code updates that get sent out are signed with the private key. If the public key can unscramble that signature, then the toaster knows to trust the update, because it has to have been signed by someone using the company's key. More understanding, like the final act of a murder mystery, is where all the clues slot together and the confusion is transformed into an orderly series of events. She almost jumped in to say something, but she stopped herself because she thought she knew where this was about to go, and she didn't want to tip this stranger off by knowing too much. She was a nice lady, sure, but she worked for the enemy. Well, that would work 100% of the time because the math really works. Now, something that's been scrambled with one half of the key pair can only ever be unscrambled with the other half. Like, it would take billions of years to fake it, even with all the computers in the world working on it together. But there's a weakness. Salima's heart pounded. She knew what Wyoming would say next because the mystery was, in fact, its final act, and she was front-running the detective as he revealed the killer and the details of the crime. The public key, that is your Booleangism, checked is stored on your Booleangism itself. It's buried in a secure chip that's not supposed to be changeable. There are so many ways around that. I mean, sometimes there's a mistake in the secure chip, something that lets you change the key. But more often, there's the boot up sequence, which is where the computer in the Booleangism learns what kind of computer it is and where it needs to look for public keys. And there's also a secure storage, but there has to be ways to update it because programmers make mistakes. And when we do, our stuff can be hacked by the bad guys. And so we want to be able to send you a new code for your appliances. So a Boulangism owner goes online and figures out how to change the key or change where the computer looks for the key and swaps in a key the owner has a private key for. And now they can sign any code and get the Boulangism to run it. Boulangism hired skilled engineers to spend years locking down their products, and then they get defeated in hours by teenagers with amateur equipment. I mean, it's not that those coders were stupid, but they were sure doing something stupid. Salima smiled. But you didn't do the stupid part. You work on something else. Wyoming smiled back. That's right. I'd rather eat glass than do the stupid shit. I work on the adaptive cooking, the thing that uses sensors to make sure the food is perfect. It's super satisfying and delicious because I get a test bench where I actually cook stuff from time to time. Well, that's a nice perk. Yeah, and there's a gym too, which is a good thing because it's only 2 weeks in and I've gained 3 pounds. The train pulled into a station and there was an incomprehensible garble from the PA as the conductor announced something. With a start, Salima realized that he was telling them they'd pulled into the end of the line and everyone had to get off. And she stood up and tried to figure out how she could remain on the platform and ride back without tipping Wyoming off that she'd stayed on the train just to pump her for info. Wyoming shrugged into her backpack and Salima slung her purse and put it under her arm, and they stepped off the train and drifted towards the escalator up to the surface level. Salima resigned herself to wasting a subway fare by going up to the street level and walking back around the block and then heading back to the station. And at the foot of the escalator, Wyoming put one of her clever, long-fingered hands on her arm and drew her to one side. I have a confession. She was blushing. Oh? My stop was about 8 back. I was just enjoying talking with you, and so I stayed on the train, and I don't really get to talk about my work much, and you're such a good listener. Salima couldn't help herself. She laughed. My stop is also several back. I was enjoying our talk so much that and Wyoming's eyes widened and she put her hand to her mouth. You're not serious. She giggled, and that set Salima off, and their laughs fed one another until they were both gasping as the conductor announced that the train they just debarked was ready for boarding, and they staggered right back to the seats they just vacated. On the ride back, Salima learned that Wyoming had come from Cincinnati. Oh my gosh, of course, Cincinnati. And that she'd done an undergrad in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. And then she started a master's in applied math when the Boulangism recruiter had offered her a huge signing bonus, stock in the new company that the hedge fund was spinning out, and a big monthly paycheck. Salima had told a little of her own story cautiously because she'd met lots of very nice white people who were not really very nice at all when she said the word refugee. But by the time she reached her stop, Wyoming had texted her a set of messaging addresses and her number and offered to help Salima anytime her Boulangism was acting up. And they shook hands, and when she got to go, Salima looked back at Wyoming. Why, she called, calling her why, and found her looking back at her, and they smiled one last time and waved goodbye. Riding up the escalator, she had a brief bout of paranoia. Their conversation had been so easy and warm and pleasurable. I mean, could it have been a setup? Did Boulangism have spies who tried to entrap suspecting pirates, befriending them on the T by positioning themselves with prominent ID badges at eye height? She shook her head and lined up for the crush at the turnstiles. It was absurd. The world was really just a small and odd place. There was no disputing that. Waiting in the lobby that night, she ran into 3 of the kids she'd lectured in the crush of her apartment, along with assorted parents sweating the unexpectedly warm early spring thaw, coats draped over their arms, with woolly hats and scarves poking out of their pockets. The kids called her auntie, and she smiled at them and introduced herself formally to the adults, 2 moms and a grandfather, familiar faces she'd seen in the elevators and corridors, but never had cause to chat with. The adults knew who she was, that was clear, and they treated her with an odd reverence as the bringer of technological freedom. And she recognized the relationship from the camps, where there were always fixers and hustlers who could get things done, lay hands on special food and liquor, get you a phone voucher or fix your phone after it came up the ghost. And she had never thought of herself in those terms, but with her newfound understanding, it made perfect sense, even to her. The small talk with these neighbors seemed like a continuation of the chatter with Y on the train, part of a long conversation about the subject that had taken over her life, taken charge of the technologies around her, the ones that were used by those distant and faceless forces to take charge of her. Y had made a big deal out of the hopelessness of trying to control someone with a gadget that they could take home and abuse in private, and that made sense to her now. I mean, it was a revelation, the sense of hopelessness as being surrounded by sensors and devices that were designed to push her around was transformed into a sense of inevitable triumph over the fools who thought they could make that work. I think that's a good mindset, right? The fools who thought that they could make it work, not going to work. Okay. What had Y said? It's not that those coders were stupid, but they sure were doing something stupid. The newfound confidence sang in her as she heated a bit of goat curry and jollof rice in a boulangism and sat down in front of the living room's big screen to poke around for a way to keep all their gadgets under their control without tipping off the manufacturers. She didn't find any immediate solutions, but that didn't matter. She was reveling in her new expertise, rereading the message board threads she'd puzzled over before, chasing down references and learning more and more and more. The ding at her door brought her out of her reverie, and she glanced up at the corner of her screen to see Adibrahim at her door. The clock read 8:45, nearly his bedtime. She let him in and got him an apple from the fruit bowl. He was always hungry. I found out how a toaster isn't like a pair of shoes, he said, around a mouthful of apple. She sat back and made a go-on gesture. It's copyright law, like warnings at the start of movies. Well, that didn't sound right to her, but she tried not to let it show on her face. If he was wrong, they could figure it out together. In the meantime, he was a 13-year-old boy who'd gone off and read a bunch of boring explanations of technology law because she told him to, and that deserved a respectful hearing. I know them. A long time ago in the last century, they made it a crime to, and he scrunched up his face as he struggled with an awkward, memorized phrase, quote, to circumvent an effective means of access control. If there's a copyrighted thing, a movie or whatever, and there's something else that controls access, you can't remove that control or do anything with it, not even for a good reason. They can send you to jail for doing it, 5 years and a $500,000 fine for the first offense. Okay, well, that sounds like it could be true, but what does that have to do with toasters? Is there a copyright bread? He shook his head. That's where I got confused too, but it's not the bread that's copyrighted. It's the software in the toaster. All the stuff we change when we jailbreak it, the part where we have to reset it and do something weird and complicated to get the fix to work, that is their circumventing. She could tell he practiced the word and the copyright. That's the code we're changing. So if it has a code in it and there's an access control, you're not allowed to change the code, even if it belongs to you. Another huge piece of comprehension was sliding into place for her. More of the half-understood posts from half-remembered threads slotting themselves into an orderly procession. She nodded vigorously. Adibrahim, I think you're right. That sounds exactly right. You did really well. You should be proud of yourself. And he beamed around a mouthful of apple. He was down to the core, and he was gnawing away at every little bit of flesh with the practice of someone who'd grown up hungry. What a strange world, where this boy was teaching her about copyright law from another century. Just talking about it is a crime, which is why you can't find out anything on the regular net, which is why you have to use the darknet tools to find out more. Telling someone how to jailbreak a device is the same thing as jailbreaking it. It's called trafficking, like with drugs, and it's the same. 5 years in prison for a first offense. Her gut did a slow roll. How many people had she taught to jailbreak? How many 5-year prison sentences had amassed? She missed her old ignorance. Just a few hours ago, when none of this had occurred to her and the forums were all a mystery, from the joy of comprehension to terror in minutes. What is the name of that law? Adibrahim consulted his phone. It's Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. She made a note. Thank you, Adibrahim. I'm going to do some more reading. He let her give him another apple on the way out of the apartment. She made herself a cup of coffee, not just regular drip, though. She wished she could go up to Nadifa's for a pot of strong, gritty Ethiopian coffee in tiny cups, and she started to read about the law. Salima was glad when Nadifa came down the next night. That's her good friend. Like after she'd come home from a day at the little sandwich shop, going over the books and dragging her thoughts back over and over from the endless loop of worry about the risks she had subjected all of her neighbors to. Nadifa brought down a bottle of Retsina and a plate of little Kamak-filled pieces of baklava dripping with honey. Salima's earliest memory was of this flavor, a pure sense memory from a time when she was a very little girl and maybe even a baby starting on solid food. It was a taste she'd forgotten in her years in the camps, and the first time she'd encountered it in Boston, it had been a revelation, a shock that had her crying and thinking of her parents so long lost. It was so easy for an old normal to make way for a new one, so easy to blot the memories of that old normal. That was a skill that had served her well, but in that bite and its honey, she had counted the cost for the first time. Nadifa knew all about this, but she also knew how much Salima liked the cakes because she understood what it was like to embrace the unthinkable parts of your past that had made you who you were. It was a bond the two women shared. I haven't seen you in so long. I have to hear about you from Adibrahim. And she used a swallow of wine to sluice away the honey, the tartness and the sweetness mixing. He's such a bright boy, you know. I know, too bright, always since he was small, asking why, all the time, and never being satisfied with because I said so. It's a sign of good character. I was that way once. Once, Nadifa snorted. You spent the past 6 months reprogramming all of our apartments, Salima. You've never stopped, girl. She shook her head. I think I made a mistake. Yes, I know you do. That's what Adibrahim told me. He thinks you're scared. I never told him that. Yes, he's a smart boy, remember? I am scared. She tapped her screen and showed Nadifa her search alert. 2 weeks ago, Boulangism got restarted. Today, it was Disher. And she tapped again. Look at this. Compliance Assurance LLC, a new company, received $28 million in funding for a product to discover the hacked appliances. That's just today's news. Nadifa nodded and looked thoughtful. I don't pretend to understand all of this, but I know some of it enough to appreciate why you're scared. The question is, what will you do about it? Salima stared at her screen. She didn't want to meet Nadifa's eyes. I've been trying to find a solution. There are so many people in the same situation as us, people who jailbroke everything after the company started to go under and now don't know what to do. I mean, I could tell the kids to go around and put everything back the way it was. Nadifa snorted again. No, you couldn't. I could tell them to, but they might not do it. They wouldn't do it. They're kids. If they understood the risks, they wouldn't join uprisings and march in the streets. And the world would be a simpler place, but not a better one, of course, but simpler. Then I better keep searching for a solution. Those Assurance Compliance LLC people are coming for us. Nadifa patted her shoulder. You'll find something. She did, an hour later, but it wasn't good. So it's the compliance stuff, the compliance monitoring, and the automated compliance monitoring, and the fact that at some point, these companies may simply be turned into DAOs and just be automated giant network machines themselves with no people attached. That's the thing that is overwhelming to me. That very, very, that not enough people are thinking about the consequences of the world that are being built. Because things like toasters and dishwashers and refrigerators, like those are big things that we can imagine and see. But imagine if the firmware is nanotechnology, right? Like things that are invisible and they're controlling you, or they're not. Like that's the part of this book, is that it was controlling her until it wasn't, and then it was not functional. So what happens if that becomes part of your bio-monitoring system, like this bio-digital convergence? And it's not just that your dishwasher doesn't work. It's that there's something inside your body that was intervening in how your body works. And then suddenly it decides to stop or it gets hacked. I hope they're never able to do this, but I can't stop the feeling that we need to be talking about it. And that's why these books are important. I mean, I have a feeling probably Cory Doctorow knew people who were building this stuff. But yeah. Okay. Next section. Hello. Is this why? Yeah. She sounded tired, though it was only 9 p.m. Weren't techies supposed to be night owls? Who is this? It's Salima. We met on the T. Oh, hi. Sorry. Rough day, and I was just dozing on the couch. What's up? Salima had known that if she had planned this call out, she would have chickened out before she could make it, and she opened her mouth and nothing came out. Salima, it's kind of an emergency. Are you okay? She was much more awake now and anxious. I'm okay, but she broke off. Can you meet me somewhere? I mean, can I come to you? Maybe a coffee shop? A pause is stretched. Then, yeah, okay. I'll text you a place, okay? Okay, I'll let you know when I get off the train. Perfect. It's just around the corner from me. Salima didn't really think that the enforcement agents for the Boulangism or Disher were listening on her line, but she still instinctively thought it would be better to have this talk with as little technology in the loop as possible. She fretted on the T and texted from the escalator. The diner was fully automated, which meant that there wouldn't be any humans around to eavesdrop on them, but it also meant that there were cameras and mics everywhere. She grimaced and tried not to stare at them while she waited for Y to show up. She came in wearing a jean jacket over a faded t-shirt with a picture of an anthropomorphic baseball with arms and legs and a big C on the jacket, which Salima deduced had something to do with Cincinnati. Salima didn't have any tees with logos from back home. Was there a Libyan baseball team, the Benghazi Bengal Tigers? Hi there, Y said, and tapped out a quick order on the table with a practiced ease, and the conveyor that snaked around the backs of the booths lurched into life and started juddering towards them with a squeak. Thank you for coming. The hot box on the conveyor reached their table and gasped open, lid yawning wide, and Y extracted a cup of tea with a packet of cookies balanced on its pressed cornstarch saucer. Sure. Have you ordered anything? The grilled sandwiches are good if you're hungry, but they've also got really good boba. Was this how MIT students ate? Thanks, Salima said. She quickly scanned the menu and jabbed at a celery soda, which sounded vile but cost exactly the minimum per person amount noted at the bottom of the menu. The hot box closed itself and the conveyor started to move again. And thanks again for coming. I mean it. Like I said, it's no problem. Normally I'd be wide awake at this hour, but my sleep's been screwed up from work stress lately, and I had a bad night last night. And it was good to hear from you again, honestly. She smiled. It was pretty, with good white teeth and a lopsided dimple. She was so young, even if she was a year older than Salima. I called you because I didn't know who to talk to. I help my neighbors jailbreak these things. Their things. Everything. Dishers, Boulangisms, thermostats, fridges, TVs, phones, everything. She checked herself. Not the elevators, though. She laughed. The elevators? I live on a poor floor, low rent. The elevators only stop for us if there's no one from the regular floors waiting or riding, and it can take a really, really long time. She stopped smiling. And that's why all your appliances need jailbreaking? Well, they came with the apartments. We're not allowed to touch them. It's in the lease. We could get thrown out. I mean, all of us. She stared at Salima with wide eyes, and she opened her biscuits and ate one, still looking at Salima. That sucks. It was Salima's turn to smile. We think so too. So you want to revert everything before you get caught? Well, we don't want to get caught. Oh, you want to keep doing it, huh? I mean, I know there's some stuff out there that's supposed to work. I've been looking, and there's a lot of advice, and it all contradicts itself, and I can't tell what works. Yeah, that sounds like online tech advice, all right. She sipped her tea. Salima tried the celery soda, prepared to discreetly spit it back down the straw, but it wasn't that bad. Y had a faraway look, and she said, "Give me a sec." And she got a screen out of her pocket and poked at it a while, and she showing it in her retinas after a few seconds and then tapping some more. I think I have an idea. You'll help us? She snorted. Why wouldn't I help you? Well, you could lose your job. She shrugged. I wasn't going to last there anyway. I can tell that already. There's other jobs. Salima had never been fired in her life. She couldn't imagine it. When things were hard at work, she worked twice as hard, and she felt gratitude to why he was risking her job for her. But there was a slithering serpent of disapproval and of Y's breezy attitude toward her career. Did she even understand how lucky she was? I mean, perhaps if she did, she wouldn't be so quick to help. Salima kept her face carefully neutral. Well, what about getting arrested? It's a 5-year prison sentence for jailbreaking. Only if it's commercial. I mean, if I don't charge, all they can do is sue me, and I'll cover my tracks. I have an idea anyway. Do you know what a virtual machine is? Salima didn't, and she could tell that if she had just said no, then Y would explain something to her, and that would lead to Y doing something to help her. And wasn't that what she'd hoped for? But she couldn't just go along. Please stop, Salima said. It's a mistake. I can't ask you to risk for us. And she blinked hard at the tears that had sprung up in her eyes. The kids in my building, I showed them what I was doing, and then they took it up, and now they could all be punished along with their families because I wasn't careful about letting other people take my risks. This is a bad situation, but I'll cover my tracks isn't going to save you. I mean, everyone who ever got into trouble thought they'd covered their tracks. I mean, I thought I'd covered my tracks, and I'm sorry, why I really shouldn't have called you. She picked up her jacket and started to stand, and Y put her hand on her arm and squeezed, stopping her. Please don't go, Salima. I can cover my tracks. It won't be hard. At the very least, I can help you figure out how to restore everything so you won't get into trouble. Look, I'm a grown adult, and I can decide what risks I take. And the tears were going to breach any moment, and Salima firmly pulled her arm free. Thank you, Wyoming. I will call you when it's all sorted out, and we can have a drink to celebrate, right? She didn't get her chance to answer. The tears came out when she reached the street, and she wished she'd grabbed some napkins on her way out of the diner. She never cried, never. Not since her parents had died anyway. Why was she crying now? She was almost asleep when she answered her own question, and she cried because she had something to lose. For the first time since she'd lost her parents, it was a terrible realization, like she'd been betrayed by her own happiness. Everything she'd attained was something she had to lose. If she had only not tried to make a life for herself, she wouldn't have anything at stake. If she hadn't made friends, she wouldn't have any friends to have betrayed with her knowledge, drunk recklessness. If she hadn't basked in the admiration of those kids, the kids wouldn't have put themselves and their parents in harm's way. She wasn't almost asleep anymore. She went back to her screen and dug into the dark web, and she got the recipes to put everything back the way it had been, and she practiced on her own kitchen, making sure she had it down cold. And once she'd mastered it, her whirling brain finally decided to let her sleep. But the sun was already rising, and she set an alarm for 1 hour later. And when it went off, she made 4 pods of dried out, nearly undrinkable coffee she found at the back of a drawer and drank it as a penance. And the sour acid liquid scalded her tongue and roiled her guts all the way to her first job of the day. And when she got back that night, there was a crowd of kids and their grown-ups waiting in the lobby as usual. And they called out to her, and she hustled past them and climbed the stairs, sleepless, weighting her legs, sweat coursing down her neck and back down her face and into her eyes. The exhaustion was like a dead thing on her back as she staggered into the apartment, flopping down on the sofa and letting her eyes close just for a moment that turned into an hour as she crashed, only to awaken with a guilty start. She had work to do. She walked up to Nadifa's apartment, and after the 35 floors she'd climbed on her way home, another 6 should have been easy, but her legs and butt were sore and tired, and she had to drag herself by the handrail. And she realized that she'd forgotten to eat dinner, and then realized she couldn't remember if she'd eaten lunch. It had been a long time since she'd missed any significant amount of sleep, and she was out of practice. Nadifa took one look around her and led her into the apartment and piled her with mint tea and small cakes that she'd have sworn she had no appetite for, but which she couldn't stop eating. And Adibrahim was nominally doing his homework, but Salima could tell he was burning with curiosity and eavesdropping, so after her second cup of tea, she called him to join them. And he turned around on the screen seat and raised it up to table height. Adibrahim, I've made a decision, and you're not going to like it. He had a good poker face. Kids who grew up in the camps got good at controlling the information they transmitted to the people around them. She could tell he knew it was coming, though, and he didn't like it. When I started jailbreaking, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't understand the risks. But now I do, thanks to you and my own reading. And Adibrahim, the risk is just too great. There is no way to know for sure what the companies will do to catch us, and if they do, we could lose everything. Even if we could fool the companies, the management of the building will notice when they don't get their share of money now that the companies have gotten restarted. The people your friends have helped out didn't appreciate what they were being signed up for. None of us did. But now that we do, we have a responsibility to help them out. His poker face was slipping. His bottom lip was trembling. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table's edge, and Nadifa gave him a warning look, and Salima's heart broke for him. After all he'd been through, he found a way to take charge of the world that had never given him the tiniest amount of control, and she was going to make him undo it all. She wanted to cry, and she could only marvel at his self-control. She put her hand on Adifa's arm. I'm sorry, Adibrahim. You have a right to be angry. It's not right, but it's necessary. And that's the most difficult kind of situation. She took a deep breath. I can't do it without you. That's not me trying to make you feel good. You are the one who taught the other kids, and only they know which apartments they worked on and what they did. And I couldn't get the other kids to even listen to me without your help. Adibrahim, will you help me? She could tell Nadifa wanted to order him to say yes, and she squeezed Nadifa's arm gently but firmly, let him make up his own mind. He stared at his hands for a long, long time. His breath was ragged. She wondered if he was going to cry after all, but then he raised his hand and blinked his wet eyes at them. I'll do it, Auntie. And she knew he'd taken the time to really, really think it through, and he had come to the right conclusion after that careful deliberation. And not because an adult had told him, and not even because his mother would never have tolerated refusal. I knew you would, Adibrahim. And she squeezed Nadifa's arms one more time. You should be very proud of this one. I am, she said, and she patted her son's hand. She knew what this had cost him, too. And suddenly, Salima was very, very tired. She'd been tired before, but this was an all-new height, or maybe depth, and for a moment she literally couldn't stop her eyes from closing. She fought them open again, and Nadifa was looking at her with concern. We'll take you downstairs. They each got a shoulder under her arms, and Adibrahim was as tall as his mother already, and Drunk walked her to the elevator and pushed the button. Time wavered. It felt like an hour before the car arrived and sighed open, and it smelled of expensive perfume from someone from the parallel universe of the non-poor floors who'd finished their ride and freed the elevator for a grudging ride for the likes of them. Nadifa sent Adibrahim back upstairs once they were in Salima's apartment, and then helped her change into a nightie and adjusted the sofa bed configuration, screwing the table down and dropping the leaves so it became a bed table. And she brought out the comforter and draped it over Salima in her half-conscious state. Salima recovered a memory long buried of a time before when she lay in her crib and her mother had tucked her in. The memory was so sweet, without any of the sorrow that usually went with the memories of her mother, and she drifted away into dreams with a smile that was still with her when she got up a few hours later to pee and swipe at her teeth to clear the rotten taste from her mouth before falling back to bed. So this one is taking a little bit longer. So I think rather than reading through the whole rest of the thing, which is about 25 more pages, I think I will take a break and maybe come back tomorrow and read the last 25 pages. But yeah, this is, I just want to ask people to sort of internalize the story and think about it. And think about what we're going to do about it. The things with rules and the things without rules and the smart contracts. And what is our responsibility to try to explain to I'm really at a loss, honestly. I have times where it goes all right and I feel like and then I have times, today was like a day where it didn't feel all right, because you're working, you're doing your best, you're really trying. And you know me, I'm not really super extreme about this. I'm not here to point fingers and call names and all of this stuff. I just really want people to understand how serious it is. And I don't know how to do it. I mean, I wish I could tell people. I don't think I tell people in a way that's over the top doomsaying. And I don't think it's all a foregone conclusion, but I do think we have an obligation. Like, we have an obligation to figure out what our position is in the world of things with rules, and who's deciding the rules, and understanding that the goal is that the machines make the rules so that the machines can know us. So anyway, I'll call in a night. For those of you guys who came in late, I just wanted to say, I feel very blessed that even in, there are a lot of you guys out there, but like, I have a small circle of folks that I collaborate with and who are doing this work, and whose work I really respect. And last night I went on and I did a live sort of unpacking Raul Diego's newest piece, Silicon Icarus, about the Nigerian Civil War. And so check that out if you haven't. I was trying, my first live feed was screen within a screen, and it was not great. But you can hear me, so you get the point across. And definitely check out Raul's article. And then I also wanted to mention today my friend Steffers at A Piece of Mindful, and it's a piece, Piece, like a puzzle piece. She has a new blog up about the color magenta, and that's something that I had touched on about a month ago, earlier in my series about the Queen's Jubilee and the beacon lighting, and that the podium was sort of the T-Mobile pink, and looking into what that meant. And so she did a much deeper dive. And so I would just suggest people check out those two articles, and and I'll be back tomorrow. So thanks for joining in.